Hello and welcome to Articulate Visual Arts, Us and Them, Expanded Forms of Portraiture. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia and recognise their continuing connection to water, land and culture. I'm currently on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I further acknowledge the traditional owners of the country in which you're on and pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. As we share our own knowledge here today, teaching, learning and research practices within the university, may we also pay our respect to the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of country. This is an outline of what we will cover in the webinar tonight. I will quickly run through some housekeeping and then we'll hear from our wonderful academics. There will be a live Q&As. At the end of the presentation, please use the Q&A function to submit any questions. We will try to get through as many as we can. However, please feel free to email us if there is anything that we do not cover tonight. Please note that the webinar is recorded and we will be sharing with everyone who has registered. And it will also be added in our Articulate webpage where it will be free and easy for everyone to access as well. We have enabled captions for tonight, so please click on the show captions icon to view. And as I said, if you have any questions after today, please feel free to email us at fast.partnerships@sydneyedu.au. Tonight's webinar is delivered in partnership with the Sydney College of the Arts here at the university, and it couldn't have been possible without Miss Salote Tawale and also Mr. John Tonkin, and the willingness to share all their expertise and insight on contemporary artists. We're very excited to cover this topic as part of our Articulate Talk series, particularly as it was requested through high schools directly, and we very much appreciate your contribution and ideas in designing this talk. We hope everyone here tonight finds it helpful for your upcoming assessments. And Salote, over to you.
I just want to say thank you, Joyce, and also acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to, First Nations people, past, present and emerging. And yeah, so I took this idea of expanded portraiture from the way that I make work as an artist and chose a series of artists who make engaging work, contemporary Australian artists who make engaging work that is, really speaks to who they are as people as well. So they're really like all coming from this first person perspective. So let's take it away. So the first artist that I've chosen is Tawale Havini, and she's from the Nakas tribe of the Hakor people, and she was born in Arawa in the autonomous region of Bougainville, but currently lives in Queensland. And her research and practice is deeply rooted in her matrilineal connections to land. So through her, a lot of the land is passed down through the women in the family, and so all of her work kind of relates to this and the communities that she exists within Bougainville. And this connection informs, through this connection of informing, like that informs her practice. Sorry, I got lost there for a minute, guys. Her work spans across photography, sound, sculpture, immersive installations, print, painting, and sculptural installation. And she also engages with curating, and is central to her practices are themes of knowledge production, transmission, inheritance, mapping, and representation. And she explores land in relation to architecture, place, histories, and also makes work through collections, looking into like colonial collections. So there's this kind of realness in relation to like her experiences, but also her histories. So I chose this work that she made with her mother, Marilyn Havini, and it's called Portals to Home, Pari and Hatuku. And in Portals to Home, Basically they explore the themes of the sort of I've just mentioned, like home, inheritance, and their collaboration is a part of like this Nakas renaming ritual following her father passed away. And so then Taloi and her mother were given new names, and Taloi's new name was Pari, and her mother was given the new name of Hatuku in their village, in the area. And so as you can see, this is a large photograph, or a number of large photographs that take up sort of like a wall, like a wallpaper. And then there are some paintings, and some of the paintings are on circular canvases. And then there's also some circular photographs there, and they're taken from a boat looking out onto the ocean. And so basically after her father had passed away, like Taloi encouraged her mum to like continue her painting practice. And so this work also is this kind of like reconnection of painting that her mother took. And her mother lives in the village, and Taloi lives in Bougainville. And so if we go to the next slide, you can see sort of a few close-ups of that. So the paintings sit into the background, which is the photographs, and they're all taken from their land and from the village, sort of surrounding the house and the ocean. And you can see, like, we've got this painting looking out on the left, painting on the wall there is looking out onto the ocean from up on the hill, and also the photograph does so as well. And there's this connection in these artworks of place and space, because they've centered it in the village. And so everything is made in their village in Bougainville. And it's the first time that they've collaborated as mother and daughter. And it's also kind of this, I guess, this moment where, if you can hear a snoring around me, I've got a little dog. He's a bit of a snorer. Yeah, so this collaboration also like speaks to their relationship as mother and daughter, and this moment that they find to connect to each other. It's the first time that they've ever made a work together. So for me, this is like, a shared familial self-portrait. Yeah, and I really just love this work because it's like painting and photography together. The next artist is Talia Smith, and Talia is of Cook Island and Samoan, and she also was born and grew up in New Zealand. And she's an artist and curator who lives here in Sydney, and she's a curator at Blacktown Art Centre, but she's also a photographer, and she makes what I would call photographic installation. And once again, we've got an artist here who has this who makes cultural connections and looks at their own heritage. They frame their own heritage in personal experience, as well as through looking at collections and having conversations with family. So it's just kind of like kind of this collective memory in a way. But then also, like, she looks at the possibility of like the future, and also looks at how she can photographically make a work from her position as this Samoan Cook Islander who lives in Australia. And so on the left here is this photograph, and as you can see, it's almost like, the walls are stripped bare in a room, and we only have the framing of that room. So she's attached her photographic works to the frames, and so then it kind of becomes this architectural space that is a gallery but isn't quite a gallery. And then the imagery is still life. So she's got like a brick there, and what looks like a lei would be the best way to say it, but and a flower-based adornment. And so and I'll just read from her website, maybe this is letting go, is a photographic installation that delves into the emotional ties to familial histories and ancestral homelands experienced from a distance. The project represents the artist's effort to visually interpret the Samoan concept of va, or the space between. Through a blend of still life, archival, and landscape photography, these images are drawn from her birthplace, ancestral homelands, and the unceded lands she now inhabits. In a globalized Pacific or Moana context, the installation possesses the question, how can one sustain a connection to their cultural histories despite physical separation? So I would particularly say this kind of expanded portraiture to me, where the objects speak to Talia herself, being from somewhere else and also being here. So there's this idea of like a person living in the diaspora. So it takes into focus like I guess a positionality or a position of being that person here, but not from here, but also having like, her life is here. And so this work to me has this very particular context of like a Samoan, Cook Islander, Australian person with New Zealander heritage. So you can see this is carried through, like most artists work through bodies of work. And so we've got this same thing happening here. In the show, don't be bashful, wear a flower behind your ear. And there's very similar kind of concepts to me that exist within it. We have these structures that are like the framing that would exist within a room, and then these large digital prints on matte paper are stuck to that frame. And within those prints, there's a lot going on. We've got objects, we've got a hand moving into a shell in that left-hand picture, and then in faded glory on the right, we have images of bananas in their own still life, and then a brick or a cinder block there. And then on top of that is a little doll. And a lot of us Pacific Islander kids had these dolls. They're actually of like, the first colonial police in the islands. And so there's these kind of aspects to it that speak to coloniality. In particular, we've got that brick in the picture, the bananas. A lot of plantations ended up being set up around Pacific Islands, like through, colonial powers taking on land. And then she's also like created in this imagery, like it's like more monotone. We've got more black and white on the left, and then on the right. So even though these are digital prints, on the right we've got all these kind of splashes of color that are like, if you don't fix something properly in the darkroom or don't wash the chemicals off a photograph when working in the darkroom. And so, it also speaks to that kind of itself as a photograph, and actually the way that photographs are used in archives to remember the past. And we do have to kind of remember that when colonial powers came into these places, there was this idea that the old ways of living would die out, and a lot of the people would die out. And, that happened here in Australia as well. And so the images are taken as in this kind of pseudo-scientific kind of a way. And so in this self-portraiture, she's looking at her own histories, but also collectively our histories as part of a colony. The next artist I've got here is Jazz Money, a artist, poet, filmmaker. She's of Wiradjuri and Irish heritage, and she's based on Gadigal lands here in Sydney. And their cross-disciplinary practice speaks to language, narrative, and First Nations legacies of place. And really all of her work is centered around poetry. So, I mean, she is a legit poet. So she's she's got a number of poetry books that have been published, and she's won a number of awards in that area. but she's like taken this thing like poetry and like really expanded that across mediums. So we have visual art, film, performance, audio and print. And it's just this kind of really rich blend of oral traditions and contemporary forms. And she uses a lot of the time she's using like found imagery or text and image to explore and express lived experiences and cultural histories of First Nations people. So let's have a look at some of her work. And so there's really this idea of how like the poetics of life. And I first saw this work at ACCA. It's called Infinite Iterative Peace. And this kind of amazing thing is it's like this 3-channel video work. So there's 3 separate videos, all cycling, and they're cycling through images and text. And it basically, I guess, I'm trying to remember the word, like it's all in a computer program. And so it's like the text and the image, you don't really ever see the same text together. So I guess almost infinitely new poems are being made, visual and text-based, as it cycles through. And the text really comes from all of the text or lines of poetry that never made it into her publications. And so you could sit there, like I sat there for quite a while, and there's just like these beautiful like sentences come out. There's very like poetic sentences. So here we've got there is a halo around the moon tonight. And I mean, kind of how amazing it is that we have this like looking out onto the ocean at a sunset. Warmth was never enough. And then in our left one, we've got this is why the tide returns to the shore in the songs we want to write. So it's just like this beautiful, infinite, poetic moment that exists as long as you sit in the space. Each night, Mother feeds me a slice of the moon, this abundance where once there was only song, as the days pass like waves. Yeah, so it's just kind of this amazing. I think it's because it's even though she's generated the imagery and the poetry in her everyday, the way that she works, she's also um like who has even she hasn't seen, say, this selection of text together because so many things are generated. This is the last work of her. We have This Is How We Love, 12 multi-channel audio, like 12 speakers. And basically, I'm just got to find my notes on that really quickly. Basically, they're a queer choir. And so she made the text for the choir to sing. And so the artwork is that you walk into the space and the speakers are hanging and you stand there and you're surrounded by the choir. Now me, so my similarity to these artists that I've chosen, and I should mention that all of these artists, show locally in Sydney and also interstate and internationally. And like we show with other artists who are making this artwork of which I see as expanded portraiture, that is really from our own position of artists, so our own histories. And so I make my work definitely about that. And that is of growing up in Australia, but also having a Fijian Indigenous history. And so I really just have spent my life making work about what is like sometimes a dislocation, sometimes a translocation of one culture to the other place, and other times just, my thoughts or experiences or memories. So I made this work Ripple for Christchurch Art Gallery last summer. And the project, I've been looking in collections at Fijian watercraft, and I was really seduced by that photography. But also there wasn't that much information about who the people were in the photographs. And so I started to make a series of paintings and take imagery of those people. And then what I really wanted to do was make something that took to that history of not knowing who they are, who these strangers were, like was I related to them? So what I did is I started to make a bunch of abstract paintings of their reflections in the water as a way of talking about how, their identities are lost in this imagery. And so in the gallery, I've created a horizon line that is a bit higher than you would expect, and all the paintings hang, and they're held in place by forms of architecture like bricks and stones and cinder blocks. And they're all things that exist both in Fiji and in Australia. And I have this video that is sort of a poetry about that experience of visiting these photos and these people and not knowing who they are. And I wanted people to sort of walk around like we were sort of in the water. And then I used this pattern of weaving on the wall that is my grandmother's pattern of weaving. She did this like diamond shape weaving. And then there's sort of like this water coming down through the use of the tarp and the mat. So all of the found objects are related to Australia, Fiji, my own like family kind of histories, or my own like contemporary experiences of this material. And so this is from Carriage Works, and it was the last show of its kind actually last year. And it's called I Remember You. It's totally based on memory. It's a painting video show with and all the paintings are kind of like little sculptures. And this is from a number of photos of me and my sister on holiday here in Sydney. We grew up in Melbourne, and it's sort of like one of those holiday pictures where you put your face in and, people take a picture. So actually every now and then people send me pictures of their faces in this painting. So all of the elements are related to either colonial histories, so this material here go from Fijian, Samoan to like Dutch wax fabrics, which have started to turn up in like Fijian material shops. And so I wanted to make these really long arms that stretched across as if they were stretching across the ocean. If you go back one, if that's all right. Yeah, and I had this karaoke room in the back because I'm a big fan of karaoke. And it's like a whole bunch of videos that I've made over the last 20 years turned into karaoke videos. There's only 3 songs. And I just wanted to have a little kind of, your own little kind of man cave in the back there. And I had this, couch. We found a couch that was exactly like one of my uncle's couches when I used to go and hang out with my cousins in country New South Wales. And yeah, so with that, I mean, I could talk about it forever, but we don't have that amount of time. But it really looks to my own kind of histories. And this last work that it was a part of the show is its own work. It's a really large raft. It's 13 meters long. It's based on a Fijian bilibili that was used to bring stuff from the interior down to market to sell. And I love this amazing ingenuity. It's like it's just tied bundles of bamboo, and you bring all these things down, and there used to be a kitchen on the back and you could sleep inside. The first time I ever saw one was in the Fiji Museum, and I was like, oh, back then we were on holiday in Fiji, and I was like, oh, I could live there, I could live in between Australia and Fiji on this raft. And so this is the second one that I've made. The first time I made one was for the Asia Pacific Triennial. And they asked me what I wanted to make, and I was like, oh, I really want to make this really long 13-meter boat. But this one you see here is has more decks on it for sunbathing. It's sort of like a holiday version. Yeah, so that's sort of like, there's more stuff on my website about that. But like the other artists, I'm really making work about what it is to be, I guess, Australian, but what are these other histories that relate to like how I became how I came here and how I became who I am. So thank you for listening to that. And I'm just going to introduce my colleague, Dr. John Tonkin.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk about the work of two Australian-based artists as well as some of my own works. My own work is often based around the possibilities of computation. They're made using software that I write myself. I'm a bit of a nerd. But I'm also interested in more traditional screen-based works. So the artists that I've chosen to talk about kind of extend in both those directions. The idea of expanded forms of portraiture, when Salote and I talked through this, we really wanted to kind of challenge what portraiture can be. And there's quite a history of the idea expanded within different fields of art making, initially with sculpture, but also in the 1960s, there was the idea of expanded cinema, which was often kind of the idea, almost like a happening, but generally always moving beyond the conventional idea of a medium. So the first artist I'm going to talk about is Angelica Mesiti, and she is from Sydney, although she's been living in Europe quite a bit for the last few years. She comes from an Italian background, and her family comes from an Italian background, and she's an example of the kind of multicultural makeup that is Australia. She grew up living with her Italian grandfather, who didn't really speak English, and she didn't really speak Italian. And she talks about how that led her to become quite interested in language and translation. And a lot of her work really focuses around how we communicate through gesture and also through ritual. So an early work of hers is called Rapture, Silent Anthem. And it was winner of the Blake Prize in 2009. So the Blake Prize is a prize for religious artworks. So this was quite an interesting take. It was, traditionally would be more painting, but this was a portrait of young people at a rock concert, and it's been slowed down, and it's kind of captures a sense of rapture of this shared ritual. So we'll play this video. I'm just showing you excerpts of stuff. Okay, another work of hers from 2014 was called The Calling. And continuing this interest of hers in language, she focused on 3 different cultures in different parts of the world that used whistle language. So whistle language is often used in cultures where they're kind of quite physically dispersed, like across 2 sides of a valley. And she's interested in how these languages are often a little bit tenuous and in danger of dying. Anyway, I've got a video where I'm going to let her speak. She also, as you can see here, it's quite often works with multi-channel. So there are 3 screens in this work.
The Calling is a 3-channel video installation, so it's 3 simultaneous projections with sound. It's a work that considers 3 communities that practice a form of whistled language. The work was shot in 3 locations in northern Turkey in the Black Sea region in a very small village called Kuşköy. The second location is in Greece on the island of Evia, and the village is called Antia. And the third location is in the Canary Islands on the island of La Gomera. I saw the whistling language as having the potential to talk about something larger that interests me, and that's the way that cultures adapt and change and survive or die. I wanted to create an installation where a viewer could experience a more abstracted kind of impression of these places and people and this tradition.
It's always a quite moving process when you've been following a project and see all that imagery come together with the sound, and to see how audiences will respond to it in the gallery space. There's a really beautiful scene where you see a grandfather communicating with a sort of, looks like an 8-year-old child, and the grandfather is whistling, whereas the child calls out in a spoken language, and you get a sense of the way those things happen over time and over space. It's quite extraordinary to see that happening.
Early on, I decided that I wanted the work to have a very spatial focus and present images in outside of the conventions of cinema or documentary. That's kind of why this form interests me.
So a more recent work of Angelica's is called Assembly, and this was the work that represented Australia at the 2019 Venice Biennale, which is a pretty big deal in the art world. It's another multi-channel work. There are 3 projections, and actually I'll show you in a second how it was set up. But actually, yeah, if you, oh, no, actually, before we continue, I'll talk about this. So that machine at the top there is a stenograph, which was used to transcribe the politicians talking in the Italian Parliament. In fact, if you watch Question Time in Australia, they have similar sort of devices, not as kind of beautiful as this one. But Angelica was quite intrigued by this thing that looked like a musical instrument, but was actually transcribing language. And so she took a poem by the Australian poet David Malouf, who similarly comes from a cross-cultural background, and got someone familiar with this machine to play that poem using the machine, and then use that process to translate into both music and movement. And this is something she's always very interested in the way that things transform and translate. The bottom image there is from I believe the Italian Senate. And so the top left image is how the work was shown. And so she kind of recreated this sense of a round space which had the 3 screens surrounding it. And that kind of was almost like you were sitting within the Parliament. There was also a dance component. That's what you can see on the top right-hand corner, which again was transcribed. And then there was music played. And you can see there a violin being played in the old Parliament House in Canberra, and a piano that's being played in the Italian Senate. So it was a quite amazing work, and it kind of really speaks to the way that we have rituals, and we have cultural rituals that create communities and create democracy. Okay, let's play this. So in the context of portraiture, you know, her work is very much about creating portraitures of communities and countries. So the other artist that I'm going to talk about is Daniel Crooks, who's a New Zealand-born artist, but he's been based in Australia for a long time. He's interested in computational approaches to working with photography and video, and a lot of his work involves the manipulation of digital imagery and footage as though it were a kind of physical material. He's often breaking things down frame by frame and kind of making these studies of time. And, you know, I feel quite an affinity with his work. When I come to talk about my work, there's some similarities in that we're both quite interested in time and how we can kind of shift people's perspective on how they perceive time. This is a pretty famous work of his from, I think, 2008, and Static Number 12, I think it's called. And he's basically taken a video of a Tai Chi performer. So this, again, another kind of Australia is a multicultural kind of aspect to this work. And he's done a split screen effect, which is where he's kind of taken slices of the video and stretched it out over time. So time kind of gets smeared onto the image. It's quite a visually powerful work. So this is our work where he's kind of played around with imagery that he's taken and overlaid to create these multiple levels of different realities, I guess. Anyway, he's going to talk.
Questions that I ask in my work are really about representations of time and trying to, I suppose, get a taste for what it might be like to experience a four-dimensional existence. I really like that idea that in these multiple worlds you can have these zones where there is a kind of constancy. So between worlds there are still these areas where, you know, amongst the nearly infinite expanding realms of possible worlds, that there might be these sort of solid streams or threads that come back and tie places together. On one side of the screen you have the forward journey, and on the other side you have the reverse journey. And you can look at that as though the screen is this threshold between the past and the future. So on the one screen you have this view into the future of what's coming towards you, and on the other view you see where you've been. So that's the past. And so the screen becomes like a kind of meniscus of now, and it becomes the hourglass, you know, and the kind of grains of time sort of passing through this aperture, so that, you know, the screen becomes this little, that's the, you know, the little point through which time passes.
Okay. It seems Zoom was struggling a little with that video. I encourage you to check out his work on YouTube and a number of other sites, gallery sites. So this is a very early work of mine. I just wanted to play this because it gives a sense of especially when I first started making work, there wasn't software for making art. There wasn't Photoshop, there wasn't Premiere, 3D packages and stuff like that. So this was all written using code. And I kind of took what these days you'd call a generative approach, where I was setting up these constraints and the software was generating stuff within those constraints. Hopefully you can hear me. I made this around the time I turned 30, and I was kind of a meditation about passing of time. And so I kind of wanted to show a couple of works that were more overtly portraiture works. So this was a part of a series of works that I made. Some of them involved me working with my own body, like images of my own body. This particular one was where members of the public could take a picture of themselves and then evolve themselves to become what they wanted to become. It was based around the idea of eugenics, which was a pretty problematic idea in the early 20th century that kind of got taken to an extreme in Nazi Germany, and truly horrendous. But I was kind of connecting that back to the idea of kind of self-improvement. And when you use that in a gallery context, at the end of the process, you got a printout of your, what you wanted to become and your transformation. And this was when it was shown up in Queensland Art Gallery, and there were 10,000 images on the wall by the end of the show. So it kind of became a collective portrait, almost like a portrait of a community. So Strange Weather was a project where I was collecting data about myself, and other people could join and collect data about themselves. So I was collecting a range of different things. So I was collecting how many alcoholic drinks I had a day, my body temperature, how much coffee I was consuming, how many items of junk mail arrived in the post each day, the consistency of my shit on a 1 to 10 scale, and how many hours of sleep that I had. Other people did this as well, and I was really surprised how people actually kind of want to do this. And then I made these 3D interactors where you could fly through and navigate the data. So I was kind of making fun of this kind of desire to kind of make everything make sense in the world. I kind of would joke about how my coffee consumption might affect the barometric pressure in Cairo and stuff like that, because I was also pulling in data from other things like that, dam heights, temperatures, stock market, and so on. So I'm just going to quickly show a couple of VR-based works and then you better stop. So recently I've become interested in working with virtual reality. This was actually this was a portrait in a more conventional sense of a Adelaide-based writer, Francesca De Rimini. So it's working with her writing and working with different ways of representing her.
My name is Francesca De Rimini, born just north of the River Thames, raised in Adelaide. My mother was an Italian woman, born in Brixton, raised in the northern dialects of immigrant parents from Emilia-Romagna and Lombardia. My father was a Londoner, a shepherd's bushman, working-class parents. I was a boat baby, transported to a pallid provincial city where people still ask which school you went to. It's as colonial and amnesiac as anywhere in Australia, just differently accented. I am not from this place, but I am of this place. My skin as dry as the air here, my bones as brittle as cesium, strontium, plutonium. It's in the water, you know, our half-lives supping from Maralinga's atomic cafe.
So I was interested in creating something that kind of created a more fragmented approach to portraiture. So, which is, there's a history of people wanting to move beyond conventional perspective, and cubist painters, for example, a lot of photography and so on. And so this is a work that I'm working on. I was always afraid. And this is a kind of self-portrait. So a lot of, and in a sense, you can say that all artworks are self-portraits on some level. But this is a work that I'm working on that's about my own kind of spatial anxiety around things like heights and confined spaces. And again, it's another virtual reality work.
I have memories of when I was only 2 or 3, walking on a jetty, scared of the gaps between the planks. Staircases with open back steps were even more terrifying. I don't like watching other people on precipices, especially if they're being careless. My sensory motor loops become entangled with theirs, resonating. My monkey neurons flinch as I watch.
Yes, it's a project that I'm kind of interested in extending the essay film format into VR. Okay, I'm going to wrap up there.
Excellent. Thank you so much, both John and Salote, for your presentations. We're most grateful. For our participants, if you have any questions relating to any of the topics that John or Salote presented, please make sure that you add it in the Q&A chat, and we'll answer them live here for you. Just before we get started, John and Salote, one of the questions that we get quite often from students is, where can they find more resources relating to these topics? Would you be able to answer that one?
Okay, I'll go. Google is your friend. There's a lot of stuff on YouTube, but often the first place is to artists have their own sites, or if they're represented by a gallery, often they'll have pages on there. Salote, do you have any?
I also think looking at things like the Asia Pacific Triennial, there's been like 30 years of them, I think now. And so they have catalogs of, between 40 to 80 like artists. Also any kinds of triennial to look for contemporary artists. There's a lot of expanded portraiture works that are about like similar things that we've talked about tonight, So yeah. Probably
Yeah,
that.
and
That's
I
where I
think,
go.
I think we really just encourage you guys to go out and see stuff. So Angelica Masidi has a show coming up in the Tank at the new Contemporary Art Gallery in New South Wales space. And there's lots of our colleague Julie Rapp has a really big show on at the MCA at the moment. Encourage you
We
to go
also
see
have a gallery at SCA that it's usually contemporary artists in every show, like group shows of contemporary artists as well. And I think actually, when students are applying to SCA, we are interested in not only like historical artists in portfolios as references, but also, what other artists that about that make work now. But I agree, I think John hit the nail on the head there. Anytime you can go in to see an exhibition is the best, because you get to see it in the way the artist has intended.
It's also how, if you're a practicing artist, you become part of a community. We're not totally working in isolation.
Yes, thank you so much. While we're waiting for people to type the questions in the Q&A, John and Salote, what are some subjects that you teach in the Sydney College of the Arts, or SCA for short?
Well, I coordinate some photography subjects, so that are about image making and also image and object together, and studio practice, so about being a maker. So a lot of in our first year studio, you do like 4 different disciplines, like sculpture, painting, 2D, 3D, cross-disciplinary. So I teach into that, and also video editing, and video and filmmaking, like making installations. John?
Yeah, Salote and I are both kind of more involved in the screen arts kind of end of things. I teach filmmaking type subjects, but I also for example, have an elective that I've just developed in the last few years, which is around mixed reality. So it is things like augmented reality and virtual reality and 3D scanning and stuff like that. And students make really great work.
I think also animation. We have a lot of like students who really enjoy making animations.
Perfect. What would be some advice that you would offer to Year 12 students, particularly in the lead up to the portfolios that they have to submit when applying to the SCA?
I guess there's a lot of information on our, I think Joyce, you're going to direct the information about what we kind of want in a portfolio, but also I think we're looking at, you know, what are you inquiring about? What are you interested in? And then also like what and how are you making things? Like, you know, is it drawing? Is it painting? Are you trying new things? You know, that's sort of what will happen when you come to art school, is that there'll be this expectation that you take the things you know, but also develop into trying new things.
Yeah, so we're kind of often looking for an openness to trying new things. And so when you're thinking about preparing your portfolio, it's good to have your major work, but it's also good to show interesting examples of other stuff that you've done that kind of pushes out in different directions.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for that. If anyone has questions, please feel free to type them in. We'll be more than happy to answer them live. And you can also email us at fast.partnerships@sydney.edu.au. Just conscious of time. So if you have any questions, please feel free to add them in. If you wanted to stay up to date with any other upcoming events or opportunities that we might be putting on, you can also sign up to our faculty of Arts and Social Sciences Participate newsletter just by scanning the QR code. This is where we advertise events as part of the Articular Talk series, for example, visual arts, or any upcoming ones that we have in the next few weeks. As we mentioned before, we do have a portfolio evening coming up. Both John and Salote are going to be there, and they're going to be giving tailored advice and feedback on your portfolio before you submit your application. You can register to attend in person or online by scanning the respective QR code. And I just want to emphasize that we also do have Open Day coming up on the 31st of August, and we would love to see you on campus. You can also tour the specialized facilities at the Sydney College of the Arts, and you get to meet John and Salote in person as well, not just via Zoom.
Can I say with that portfolio evening too, if you are really keen on coming, like, you know, you can just either bring some elements that just to, you know, get a bit of a response to it, or even just come to ask all those questions, or bring your parents who, if they want to like ask questions, you know, and that's what those kind of portfolio evenings are designed for, just to answer any questions.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And last but by no means least, our wonderful team at the Cha Wing Museum has curated a wonderful exhibition together, and I would highly recommend that you visit this fantastic installation work by Consuelo Cavanilla. And it's on at the moment. The Cha Wing Museum is free to access as well. So we highly encourage that you pay a visit on the campus and have a look through that one as well. And then just quickly wrapping up, we have the upcoming talks taking place over the next fortnight. So we have philosophy and critical thinking taking place next Thursday, the 29th of August, and community and family studies taking place the following Tuesday. You can view more information and register by scanning the QR codes below, and you can also access any previous Articular Talks, podcasts, and learning resources from our webpage with a QR code on the right. And with that said, I would like to say thank you so much to our presenters for your inspiring talks tonight. And also thank you so much for everyone for attending. We would love to wish you a wonderful night ahead. Thank you, everyone.